Look at the Dell XPS 159560. We've already seen the Ultra HD version, so we'll look at the Full HD version here today. Look at the display, the general performance, and the build quality, what it's like to use. And this unit is from February this year, so it's had a fair bit of wears and marks. So it's useful also to gather some ideas of what it might look like if you get one today. In a few months' time. But first, we'll look at the sort of the laptop. It's we put it on top of a M4700 precision workstation. Immediately, you just see how how much sort of lighter and sort of a thinner, and in terms of footprint, it's just so much more compact. It's quite amazing how they did this. Okay, so we'll pop in and look at the display first. We're looking at the display from the side. It's IPS wide viewing angle display. So it's non-touch, but it's really gorgeous color. But to be frank, the first thing you notice if you were to switch from the 4K touch version to this is the color on the Full HD version of the laptop is a lot more subdued, if anything, sort of less vibrant and almost slightly dull. It's not a criticism. It's just the sort of 4K version. It's sort of, unless you calibrate it, put in sRGB, feels a bit oversaturated, almost OLED-like. That's because the 4K version is more tailored to the sort of display, well, towards a professional crowd who needs that sort of extra color gamut, whereas this one is more tailored towards the sort of standard usage, etc. And it's a perfectly good display. On any other laptop, you'd be very lucky to have a display this gorgeous. In terms of usage, it's actually quite practical in the sense that you don't have to worry about app scaling. It's it's tailored to Windows usage. It's running 100% scaling, so you don't have to worry about sort of text being really small on the sort of 4K display. That's a nice thing. And also the matte finish on the display just means that if you're taking a laptop, because it's thin and light, to a sort of cafe, etc., and you're near a window, you don't really have to worry about reflections, etc. That's quite nice. Much less sort of reflection. It makes kind of looking at the screen for a prolonged time easier. What you might also notice is that because it's 4 times fewer pixels for the computer to drive, it's probably going to help the battery. That's something that's quite useful. It's just a personal preference, but I think this particular Full HD version, it's useful if you have lots of meetings with colleagues, and sometimes you have to take it on some notes on the sort of laptop, because it doesn't really distract people, and if you put on a sort of quite bland wallpaper, etc., it just blends in. Whereas if you have the 4K version of this laptop, you have the sort of almost a sort of mirror effect on the whole machine, and it causes a lot of sort of reflection and sort of draws people's attention, which is not always wanted. So it's this particular one, because it's got matte finish, etc. It's just more discreet and more kind of helps you sort of stay focused, etc. But obviously each panel has their own strengths and weakness, and so it's up to you to pick one that suits you the best. In terms of the general sort of build quality, it's really quite solid. We'll look at the sort of trackpad and keypad. So very minimal wear after a few months. It will appear probably first on the keypad, then on the trackpad in terms of wears, etc. One of the first thing you'll notice in this keyboard, especially if you switch from a sort of proper desktop keypad or sort of traditional workstation sort of a keypad, is that the keypad travel is really thin and it doesn't give you much sort of feedback. That could really be improved, I think, in the next generation of the ProRep. But to be honest, from day-to-day usage, it's not going to annoy you that much once your sort of hand is sort of used to it. It's just at first it's kind of a shock to use it, but it's kind of once your muscle memory is adjusted to it, maybe after half an hour or within a few days, if that's what it takes to, then you'll get used to it, provided you don't sort of keep switching between this and sort of high quality keypad, this and that, because that sort of really disorientate things. Okay, so if we look at the ports, there is sort of 2 USB 3 ports, one on each side. There is a HDMI and USB-C on this side, as we can see. also a charging port and audio port, which is quite a good sort of range. You would expect more, but it's I think for thin and light you can't do much better. So that's USB 3 card reader and Noble lock, as well as the battery indicator. It's really useful to have the battery indicator for some reason. It's really nice. Okay, so it could do with another USB 3, but it's understand the sort of size is quite constrained. Overall, I would say the sort of build quality, it's quite well designed, but just be conscious that in usage, the sort of there will be lots of sort of marks. You can sort of swipe it sort of away with the sort of laptop cleaner, etc. But it does attract sort of fingerprint, etc. But otherwise, the sort of inside of the laptop lasts quite well. In terms of outside the laptop, the lid is quite sturdy. Sometimes if you lift up the lid, you need two hands, one to steady the base and one to lift it up. So it's quite firm lid, which is, I think, is appreciated. And I think generally, in terms of build quality externally, it's quite solid. You'll expect some wears and marks, etc. We'll come back to that later. Okay, quickly dive into performance if we can, and we'll quickly look at the sort of actual spec of this machine. So Core i5, it's quite powerful. It's just like the sort of i7 7th gen, but it doesn't have hyperthreading, so it's slower in some tasks, but not dramatically slower. Just maybe stay away from the i3 because those are actually ludicrous. Supports up to 32 gig memory, but got 8 at the moment. You can always upgrade the memory. It's cheaper if you do yourself, provided you know what you're doing and the implication on the warranty potentially. If you don't install it well, you definitely need your own custom. Well, you need a custom screwdriver to open the base because it's got the irregular shape. Okay, so the Wi-Fi, killer Wi-Fi, some people don't like it, but the only way around it seems to be sort of if you install your own Wi-Fi by opening the base. Wish there was a easier way around it. Nicely, they've got the 1050 4GB graphics in this, so the sort of in terms of the heat, if you game, the sort of heat comes up through the sort of vent gap here, and the fan really does kick in if you do especially CPU and GPU intensive stuff. And in terms of sustained performance, it's going to be quite a bit slower. Well, in comparison to the laptop that are really thick and can keep the sort of turbo boost. But I think in terms of performance, it's well in line with the sort of normal 15.6 sort of heavier sort of workstation, in the sense that it will be quite fast. It's just keeping the sort of turbo boost above maybe 3.2, 3.4 gigahertz is going to be sort of a hard push for any of the modern laptops. For the simple reason, it's going to generate quite a bit of heat. Anyway, okay. So in terms of the other thing that is quite useful to know before you buy the laptop is that if you buy the laptop with 1 terabyte, well, with the sort of 2.5-inch hard drive, it leaves less space for bigger internal battery. So this, because it came with a hard drive, it has a smaller 56 watt hour battery. But if you ordered it with SSD, M2 SSD to begin with, you could potentially get the 97 watts hour battery. That would be potentially useful. Okay, so just quickly on to the other things. So in terms of the speakers, good quality, quite nice. Good quality for sort of entertainment laptop. It doesn't have subwoofer, but the sort of because Dell uses some their own sort of software, it sort of acts like a sort of equalizer. You do feel sort of the space, which is quite nice. But I mean, obviously, it would be nice to have subwoofer, but it's a thin and light laptop. The webcam, again, other people have already pointed this out in previous 9550 reviews. I don't think there's an easy way around it, but it's just kind of if you type, and unless you sort of move the lid quite uncomfortably back, you will see potentially your hand through, because it's just at this particular angle. It's quite annoying, but there's no easy way I can think of around this with a sort of such a delightfully thin and very, very narrow bezel. And anyway, let's quickly take a look at what kind of things to be wary of. Okay, so after maybe 8-9 months usage, externally the sort of edge and sort of metal, the side of it is first to get marks normally, and there's some marks on the base, and sometimes there's some marks on the plastic, etc. But that's to be expected. If you have it in a sort of laptop bag, that's fine, but just make sure the sort of edge of the laptop doesn't get too close to the zipper. Actually, for more protection, you might actually want a sort of laptop, one of those sleeves things to put the laptop into, provided it doesn't damage the laptop, and then put the sleeve with the laptop inside into a laptop bag. That gives you sort of double protection. That's probably the most secure way to do it, but otherwise it's just kind of marks will just pop up. If you're not easily bothered with it, then maybe not something to worry about, but because it's aluminium, if there's flaws, you will see it quite easily, and it's for some people it might be quite annoying, etc., etc. For some people it might not bother them too. Okay, so otherwise the sort of a base, it's probably expect some wears and marks, but I think generally the build quality is actually quite good, and the lid is surprisingly reassuring, as already mentioned. We'll get to something that we've recently just noticed, and this is within the UK context. This is something that troubles us slightly. So basically, when you buy the XPS 15, you are basically locked into Dell's premium support warranty in the UK, it seems. It might vary from time to time, depending on region, etc. But in the UK, you seem to be able to get it with premium support, which is great. It's just, unfortunately, premium support is also premium in the sense that it's costly. Okay, so if you were to upgrade it to 2 years from 1 year support, then it's £50. That's great. Actually, that's really great. 3 years, okay, so 3 years, then that's actually still not bad. And 4 years, etc. That might seem quite a bit of change considering. But here's a catch. If you get the laptop with the actual warranty, if you just kind of check out with 1 year warranty, the standard warranty, and if you were to want to get it in the future with slightly longer warranty, you will find that you have to pay quite a notable amount of premium. Okay, so when we code today to get a quote for the sort of 1 year extension equivalent on the sort of premium on site, they quoted us £180 for 1 year, and for the full one, it was £440 for the full duration one. And it's just absolutely shocking. It's essentially, if you were to get it standalone after you buy the laptop, the warranty costs potentially twice as much, if not more. And that's quite outrageous. But I mean, I understand that Dell sort of understands if customer were to get something at the point of purchase, the cost of acquisition is a tiny bit less than if they were to get it at a later point, at which point they would be willing to pay more. But there is a sort of there is reasonable, and there is kind of just a rip-off, and this is probably the latter. So if you think about warranty, probably definitely get it earlier rather than later, and probably work out whichever makes sense for you. But obviously, if you don't think you'll have this laptop, maybe don't have the warranty extend it. But if you think at all there might be a chance that you might need it, you might still be using the machine in, let's say, 2 years' time, you might actually find yourself 3 years warranty great. It's just for this particular unit, we had quite an interesting experience because we've already had this particular issue. This is a screenshot of the sort of issue. So you had the bars and constantly sort of top half of the screen sort of having issues. And the problem with this laptop is, unfortunately, the motherboard is because it's really thin and light. So the graphic card is on the motherboard, so is CPU. It's basically, if anything fails, more or less you need to replace the motherboard. So, well, that's okay. It's not going to be cheap to do, really not cheap if you're outside warranty. So That's why we keep sort of banging on about the sort of warranty. It's just we don't really like that, and it's really not nice to have kind of really good laptop kind of having that kind of issue. So going back to it, if you can, sort of definitely consider the sort of a Dell warranty. It will be more expensive usually from our experience if you get it standalone after you buy the laptop. So it might even be worthwhile considering holding off the purchase just a while if it takes you longer to decide, if it takes you longer to work out what kind of life cycle you plan for the machine. Okay, so in terms of other things, if there's any particular questions, just drop us a message. We'll be happy to take a look at it for you. Thanks.